Yes, I can go to a snooker tournament and blow up an orange paint bomb there to protest climate change. And that's more available to me than going and finding my small holding.
Creating a freer society.
The greenwashing conversation has been, I think, a really good step in terms of critiquing the way in which capital sells back its own product to people as something that could be in some way rehabilitative, environmentally revolutionary. These words like revolution are used all the time by capitalists when in actual fact the worst thing they could ever think of would be a real revolution. That's the end of them. So I suppose the question here is about how much we deal with this as a conflict, as you're saying, that right to bite, the idea that you actually have to bite back first, and then how much we see this as a kind of, as you say, an act of love and a duty to each other. So how do we find a path between those two? Because I think what we see right now is those two groups are quite well represented on the edges in terms of being people who want to retreat and go and live in a small holding with their family, and then those people who want to go out in the streets and protest against big government or the hyper-capitalist agenda. But what happens is I think the normal person is left a little bit wondering, what's there for me? How do I toe this line that isn't a kind of radical anarchist, but also isn't someone who decides they're only going to wear linen for the rest of their life and goes and bakes bread in rural Ireland? This is the question especially for young people, for whom I think the first option, that kind of radical anarchist, is I suppose more available. And so that's perhaps the one they turn to. Is I can go to a snooker tournament and blow up an orange paint bomb there to protest climate change, and that's more available to me than going and finding my small holding.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You need to combine keeping out the predators, but in a more gentle way. We don't need to kill them now. When maybe in historical times the world was much more that way inclined, where you actually kill. And what I'm saying is you have to gently recognize our values are not the same. And therefore, if we're going to create the environment where the next generation can actually thrive, we need to openly say we're not going to go with globalization. We're not going to go with a big state. And therefore, that which frees people up to actually change the world. And as you say, we've got to focus, move away from the anarchy to channel that energy, that freedom, into improving the world. Because these people, there's no question that people in global that are trying to address the climate change, they're absolutely right. But they can't use violence. We've got to keep out those alien values using the right form of, and with the technology, by the way, we can do that all now because we've got the ability to create a digital ledger where everything becomes visible. And this is almost something I have to think about a lot. Should we be completely transparent and have a ledger where everything is visible? Now, people from the younger generation would say, 1 minute, I'm free. I should really be able to hide what I'm doing. And I've thought about this a lot. I'm not sure that's right. I think the reason why people want there not to be a completely open, transparent ledger is because they've been almost intimidated into feeling that the information is mine, and if I'm not succeeding, it's because it's my own fault, and therefore they are scared of almost transparency. But I think the true solution is transparency, because that way people won't be able to hide from the consequences of their actions.
I suppose there's a couple of elements here that I'd like to pick up on. One of which is that the defense that someone saying that might make is that they know, and I think we all know, that even with amazing technology like the blockchain and incredible kind of this crypto revolution that we're seeing as well, how the average person is going to be monitored on those platforms is very different. And we all know this because it's happened with every type of money since time in memoriam. Those at the top with the most money will find a way around that transparency, and they always have, and they always will. I mean, call me a pessimist, but I do think that's true. And they have the tools to do that. And so I think most people do the way they balk at that kind of digital transparency is because they understand that there is going to be an upper echelon who are able to say that they're being fully transparent and to not be fully transparent. It's what everyone's kind of seen over the last decade or so, and it's definitely true of American society, perhaps even more than British society. I think there's a deep, deep sense over there that there is absolutely no transparency at the top, and that people at the bottom are basically being laid bare constantly for their minor failings, when those at the top are being let go for their incredibly major flaws. And then I suppose the other side of this conversation as well about the digitization and the future of the way in which we kind of interact with our own money and the flow of money through society is, I suppose, how much it could be misused in the wrong hands. Here we talk about the covenant as a very utopian idea, and you've laid out some practical elements that could be put in place to begin that process. But we're talking, and understandably, it's a kind of spiritual idea about an eventual society in which you do have a functioning covenant and people do live in a way that's sustainable. But we don't have any guarantee that the right people will be looking after those platforms and monitoring people's movement and all of that sort of stuff. So those are my two kind of criticisms there, I suppose, that I'd lay.
You raised the point that people are cynical because the elite always control the system, and they use information to brainwash, to trigger certain behaviours and to take away freedom of choice. But the answer is not to have the transparency. The answer is to make democracy work. Why can't we get everybody to vote on a thought in an instant with social media? Of course you can, but we have to ensure that democracy works, and we haven't got democracy anywhere in the world. In America, we've got two parties that are very closely aligned, and the incestuous relationship between politics and the markets is crazy, where you can actually buy legislation since Citizens United. It's a crazy world that we live in.
Democracy might even be as utopian as the covenant in this situation.
Democracy it's not democratic. And the same is true in Europe, where, again, if you look at the European Commission or the central bank, they're not accountable to anybody. And therefore, we have to focus on creating that accountability. And the technology can do it, but not in the hands of the few. So what we have to do, I think a big part, is let's focus on making democracy work. And that is using technology and not allowing the elites to control it. And that's why digital currency, a central bank digital currency, not controlled by the central bank, but a transparent, harnessed by the people. So the opportunity is now. We are facing crazy times now, and I am seeing it. I called the collapse in the banking system before it happened. We're not anywhere near. So this is massively the start of the process. It's going to collapse. How do I know it's going to collapse? Because there's no way of kind of solving inflation and interest rates. They're both problematic. You can't resolve it, so it's going to collapse. And the problems are going to be worse, much worse than 2008. And therefore, we are presented in our lifetime with a once-in-a-era opportunity to get it right. And if we have to start a conversation now about how we want to ensure the elite do not control us.